Gray water swirled around her knees. It was freezing, a biting cold that settled deep in her bones. June didn't shiver. She learned a long time ago that shivering drew the eye, and visibility was dangerous for a gnoll. Not here. Not in a castle full of creatures who hunted for sport. She scrubbed harder. The brush scraped against the stone floor, a harsh, rhythmic shhh echoing in the massive hallway. To make things worse, the pack was celebrating a hunt. Laughter boomed from the banquet hall doors. The smell of roasted meat and heavy wine drifted out, taunting her empty stomach. But she kept her head down. If she didn't look up, maybe she didn't exist. A pair of polished black boots stopped right in front of her bucket. June went still. Oops. The voice was smooth. Mocking. Before she could move, a goblet tipped over. Red wine splashed across the clean floor, spreading like a fresh wound on the gray stone. June knew who it was without looking. Beta Silas's son. A cruel boy who treated cruelty like a pastime. Look what you did, Null, he sneered. Clumsy. I didn't do it. The words sat heavy on her tongue. But she remembered the last time she spoke back, the bruise on her arm still fading to a sickly yellow. She swallowed the defense. I'm sorry, sir, June whispered. I'll clean it up. See that you do. He kicked the bucket. Dirty water sloshed over the rim, soaking her hands. Useless. He walked away, leaving her in the mess. June squeezed the scrub brush until her knuckles turned white. Useless. That was the word. Born without a wolf. Born silent in a world of screaming instincts. She was a biological error haunting the edges of the pack. She dipped the sponge back into the water. Ring. Scrub. Repeat. She didn't cry. Tears were a waste of hydration. Moments later, the heavy oak doors at the end of the hall creaked open. Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper, stepped out. She was a stern woman with hair pulled back tight enough to lift her eyebrows. Usually, she looked at June with annoyance. Today, her face was gray. Veros, Mrs. Gable barked. June stood up quickly, wiping her wet hands on her apron. Yes, ma'am? Mrs. Gable didn't come closer. She stayed by the door, wringing her hands, a nervous habit June had never seen on the woman before. Leave the floor, Mrs. Gable said. You have a new assignment. Dread coiled in June's stomach. But I haven't finished the hall. Forget the hall. Mrs. Gable looked away, staring fixedly at a wall torch. The prince needs his cell cleaned. The last maid is indisposed. June felt the blood leave her face. The prince. Prince Xander. The monster in the basement. The alpha who went feral. Everyone knew the stories. No one went into the dungeon and came out whole. The last maid hadn't just fallen ill, June had seen them carry her out, blood dark and heavy on the stretcher. Ma'am. June breathed. Please. It wasn't a request, girl. Mrs. Gable finally looked at her. There was no cruelty in her eyes this time. Only pity. Which was worse? Go. Now. June nodded mechanically. She untied her apron. Her heart hammered against her ribs, painful and fast. She wasn't brave. She wasn't strong. Yet, she turned toward the stairs that led down into the dark.
Noise. It wasn't sound. It was physical pressure. A rhythmic slamming against the inside of his skull. Thump-thump. Thump-thump. The heartbeats of the guards outside the iron door sounded like war drums. Xander pressed his hands over his ears, curling into the corner of the cell. The walls were thick stone, damp and cold, but they offered no shelter. He let out a low growl, a rattle of pure agony. The red haze was winning. It had started as a whisper months ago. Now, it was a roar. The madness of the Alpha Prime. His senses were stretched so thin that existence itself was torture. He could smell the rust on the hinges. He could smell the sour anxiety sweating out of the men standing 20 feet away. He could hear the blood rushing through their veins. "Stop," he grit out. His voice was a wreck. "Make it stop." The heavy lock on the door clicked. Clack. Clack. The sound was sharp enough to cut. Xander flinched, muscles locking. The chains on his wrists rattled, heavy, silver-infused iron designed to burn. The sear of his skin against the metal was the only thing grounding him to reality. The door groaned open. A guard stepped in. Just one step. Xander felt the man's presence like a shockwave. The fear was pungent, acrid in the air. Xander roared. It wasn't a choice. It was instinct. The psychic pressure inside him exploded outward, a command of pure dominance he couldn't leash. Submit. The guard didn't even make it 3 feet. Ugh. The man doubled over, clutching his head as the alpha pressure crushed him. His nose burst, blood dripping onto the stone. Get out. Xander bellowed, smashing his fist against the wall. Stone cracked. Dust rained down. Get out before I kill you. He didn't want to kill him. That's why he was down here. To protect him from himself. The guard scrambled back, vomiting on his own boots, crawling to escape the weight of Xander's aura. The door slammed shut. Silence, but not really. Xander panted, chest heaving. The wolf was scratching at the back of his mind, demanding violence. Demanding release. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. Massive, scarred hands that used to hold a sword, used to hold his brother, now they were just weapons. Just end it, Xander whispered to the dark. Please, Father. In the quiet, he heard something new. Footsteps. Lighter this time. Hesitant. The soft shuffle of fabric. Someone else was coming. Rage flared in his gut. They were sending someone else to die? He pushed himself up, back against the cold wall. His eyes burned in the gloom. If they came in here, he would break them. He wouldn't mean to, but he would. In that moment, he decided. He wouldn't look. He would turn his back. If he ignored them, maybe the pressure wouldn't crush them as fast. Maybe they would run. Run, he thought, projecting the command. Run away from me. But the footsteps didn't stop. They got closer.
The air down here tasted metallic. Stagnant. June stood before the iron door. It was massive, covered in gouges that looked like they were made by oversized claws. There were no guards here. They had retreated to the top of the stairs. Just go in, clean the bucket, and come out, one of them had said, refusing to meet her eyes. If you can. If she can. Her hand shook so badly the empty pail rattled against her leg. She gripped the handle with both hands to silence it. Breathe, she told herself. She reached for the lever. Heavy, cold, greasy. She pushed down. The hinges shrieked. June winced, expecting a roar to blast her backward. She expected the crushing weight they talked about, the force that snapped bones. She braced herself, eyes squeezed shut. Nothing happened. No pain. No crushing weight. No voice in her head commanding her to kneel. June opened one eye. The air was just air. Damp. Musty. But empty. She moved slowly, slipping inside the room, her worn shoes scraping softly on the stone. It was dark, lit only by a single high window letting in a sliver of gray moonlight. And there he was. The prince. He huddled in the far corner, facing the wall. He was huge, broader than any man in the village. His muscles were knotted and tense beneath his torn shirt. Chains thick as her arm bound his wrists to the wall. He was shaking. Leave, he growled. The sound vibrated in her chest. It was terrifying, yes. But it sounded human. Not a monster. Just a man in pain. June didn't run. She didn't know what scared her more, the prince, or the thought of facing Mrs. Gable with the job unfinished. I can't, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. I have to clean. The prince went rigid. The silence in the room stretched tight. He slowly turned his head. June stopped breathing. His face was shadowed, covered in a rough beard, hair matted. But his eyes were glowing. Burning yellow in the dark. He looked at her. Blinked. Why wasn't she on the floor? Why wasn't she bleeding? You. He turned fully now, chains clinking. He sniffed the air, a sharp inhale. You're still standing. June gripped her bucket. Yes, Your Highness. He took a step toward her. The chain pulled taut. He looked at her like she was an equation he couldn't solve. Why aren't you running? He asked. His voice wasn't a roar anymore. It was stunned. I have nowhere to run to, June said. It was the simple truth. Without warning, he leaned in. Close. She could smell him, ozone and something sharp, like a storm about to break. He didn't smell like madness. You're quiet, he murmured, his eyes searching her face. Why are you so quiet? June stared up at him. For the first time in her life, someone was looking at her. Not through her. I'm just June, she said. The prince let out a breath, and his shoulders slumped. The glow in his eyes faded, just a fraction. June, he tested the name. And in that moment, the dark cell didn't feel so empty. The bucket hit the stone floor with a hollow clank. June flinched. She expected the noise to trigger him, to send the beast launching across the room to tear her apart. But when she peered through her lashes, the prince hadn't moved. He was just watching her. His eyes were intense. Golden. Unblinking. They tracked her every movement like a predator watching prey in tall grass. Yet, he didn't attack. Do your job, she told herself. Just clean. She dropped to her knees. The cold dampness of the stone soaked into her pants immediately. She dipped the rag into the soapy water, her hands trembling so hard ripples disturbed the surface. Wring. Wipe. Scrub. The silence in the room was heavy. It wasn't peaceful. It was the pressurized air before a storm breaks. What are you? His voice was a rumble of thunder, low and vibrating in the floorboards beneath her knees. June froze, her rag hovering over a patch of moss. She didn't look up. I'm the maid, Your Highness. No. The chains rattled as he shifted. You're not just a maid. The others, they vomit. They bleed. They scream when they get this close. He took a step. Then another. June's heart hammered against her ribs. Thump. Thump. She scurried backward on her knees, putting the bucket between them like a flimsy shield. I'm a null, sir, she whispered. The shame burned her cheeks, hot and familiar. I don't have a wolf. I'm empty. She waited for the insult. Defect. Mistake. Waste of space. She had heard them all. Instead, the prince let out a sound that was half laugh, half groan. Empty, he repeated. The word sounded like a prayer on his lips. You're quiet. Because of that tone, June finally looked up. He wasn't looking at her with disgust. He was looking at her with a starving hunger that had nothing to do with food. He looked like a man dying of thirst who had just found a well. Stand up, he commanded. It wasn't a shout. It was a compulsion. Without thinking, June scrambled to her feet. She wiped her soapy hands on her apron, backing away until her spine hit the cold iron of the door. There was nowhere left to go. Please, she breathed, her voice shaking. I just want to finish my shift. No. He shook his head, messy hair falling over his eyes. You don't understand. The noise, it stopped. When you walked in. It stopped. He took another step. The massive muscles in his chest shifted under his sweat-stained shirt. He was too big. Too close. Don't move, he growled. June stopped breathing. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the teeth. Waiting for the end. But it didn't come. Instead, she felt a puff of hot air against her forehead. He was leaning down. Sniffing her. Rain, he murmured, his voice rough with confusion. And soap. And nothing else. She opened her eyes. He was inches away. His face was covered in a rough beard, and there were dark circles under his eyes, but he wasn't a monster. He was just a man. A terrified, exhausted man. "You're not afraid?" he asked, tilting his head. "I am terrifyingly afraid," June squeaked. For the first time, the corner of his lip twitched upward. "Good," he whispered. "You should be."
It was a trick. It had to be. Xander paced the length of his chain, the iron cuffs biting into his raw wrists. Clink. Drag. Clink. He watched the small woman in the gray tunic. She was scrubbing the floor again, trying to make herself invisible. But to Xander, she was a beacon. A lighthouse in a hurricane. For months, his world had been a screaming cacophony of other people's emotions. The guard's lust. The king's disappointment. The cook's anxiety. It all flooded his brain, drowning him in the red haze. But her? She was a void. A pocket of blessed, cool silence. When she was near, the headache that had been splitting his skull for weeks faded to a dull throb. He could think. He could breathe. Touch her, the wolf inside him whispered. Make sure she's real. He tried to fight it. He was dangerous. He was a weapon that couldn't be sheathed. If he touched her, he might break her. Stay away, his mind warned. Claim her, his instinct roared. Without warning, his body moved on its own. The wolf took the wheel. He lunged. The chains pulled taut, snapping with a sound like a gunshot, but he didn't stop. He closed the distance in 2 strides. Ah! The girl gasped, dropping her brush. She scrambled back, but he was faster. He slammed his hand against the wall right beside her head, boxing her in. Dust trickled down from the ceiling. "Who sent you?" he snarled, his voice dropping into a feral register. "Is this Silas's doing? Is he trying to tempt me?" He leaned in, baring his teeth. He wanted to scare her. He needed to scare her. If she ran, he would be safe. If she stayed, he would destroy her. "Answer me," he roared. The girl trembled. She was so small against him. Fragile. He could snap her neck with a twitch of his finger. "No one sent me," she cried out, pressing herself flat against the stones. "I'm just a maid. Please." Her fear hit him then. But it wasn't the sour, cloying scent of the guards. It was clean. Sharp. Honest. She wasn't lying. Even so, the wolf wasn't satisfied. It wanted to dominate. It wanted to own the silence. He grabbed her chin. His fingers were rough, calloused, stained with dust. He forced her to look at him. "Look at me," he commanded. The alpha tone laced his words, a psychic weight that should have forced her to her knees. But she didn't kneel. She just stared back, her brown eyes wide and watery. "I see you," she whispered. The words hit him harder than a physical blow. She didn't see the prince. She didn't see the monster. She saw him. His grip on her chin loosened. His thumb brushed her cheek, soft, warm skin. It sent a jolt of electricity straight to his heart. "You're real," he breathed. He leaned closer, driven by a desperate need to be near the quiet. His nose brushed her neck. He inhaled sharply. Vanilla. And fear. And underneath it all, acceptance. "Don't leave," he rumbled against her skin. It was half threat, half plea. "You can't leave."
He was too close. His breath was hot on her neck. His hand was a heavy weight on her jaw, holding her in place. June's panic battered against her ribs. Thump thump thump. She should be dead. Any other wolf would be dead. But she was standing here, pinned against a dungeon wall by a man who could crush boulders with his bare hands. "You can't leave," he mumbled into her hair. It wasn't romantic. It was terrifying. He sounded possessed. "Let go," June whimpered. She pushed against his chest. It was like pushing a brick wall. "No," he growled. His grip tightened. Not enough to bruise, but enough to trap. "Mine. The silence is mine." Something inside her snapped. Maybe it was the years of being pushed around. Maybe it was the memory of Beta Silas's son kicking her bucket. Maybe it was the fact that she was tired, so incredibly tired, of being treated like an object. She wasn't a soothing balm. She wasn't a toy. She was a person. "I said." June grit her teeth. Her hand moved before her brain could stop it. Crack. The sound echoed through the dungeon like a whip crack. June stared at her own hand. Her palm stung. She had slapped the prince. The Alpha Prime. The feral beast. The room went impossibly still. The prince froze. His head whipped to the side from the force of the blow. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. June felt a chill slice through her veins. Oh God. I'm dead. I'm actually dead. Slowly, terrifyingly slowly. Xander turned his face back to her. His cheek was already turning red. But the look in his eyes had changed. The golden fire was gone. The feral glaze had vanished. In its place was clarity. Sharp, blue-gold clarity. He blinked. Once. Twice. He looked at her hand, then at her face. He didn't look angry. He looked awake. "You." He touched his cheek, his fingers grazing the spot she had struck. "You hit me." "I." June swallowed a lump the size of a rock. "You wouldn't let go." She braced herself for the blow. For the roar. Instead, a strange sound bubbled up from his chest. A low, raspy chuckle. "You hit me," he said again, wonder in his voice. "No one has touched me in months without dying. And you slapped me." He stepped back. He gave her space. The oppressive heat of his body vanished, leaving her cold. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was steady now. Regal. The voice of a prince, not a beast. "June," she whispered. "June Veros." "June," he nodded. He looked at the door, then back at her. "They sent you in here to die, June Veros. Did you know that?" She nodded, tears finally spilling over. "Yes." "Well," Xander straightened up. He ripped the torn sleeve of his shirt, wiping the sweat from his brow. "They were wrong." He walked over to the corner and sat down on the stone bench. He patted the spot next to him. Not a command. An invitation. "Sit," he said. "We need to talk." "About what?" June asked, wary. Xander looked at his hands, then locked eyes with her. "About how you're going to get me out of here." The door to the royal chambers didn't creak. It glided open, revealing a room that smelled of lavender, beeswax, and violence. June stepped inside, her worn canvas shoes sinking into carpet so thick it felt like walking on moss. It was a prison wrapped in velvet. "Stay here," the captain of the guard had barked, shoving her across the threshold. "The prince demands you clean only this room." The door clicked shut behind her. The lock turned. June exhaled, the tension escaping her lungs in a rush. She looked around. The room was massive, a sprawling suite of heavy drapes, mahogany furniture, and a fireplace big enough to roast a boar. But beneath the luxury, the scars of the beast were everywhere. The heavy oak desk was splintered down the middle. The curtains were shredded, hanging in sad, purple ribbons. Deep, gouging claw marks marred the stone above the fireplace. What's worse, the room felt lonely. It felt like a place where a man had paced back and forth, losing his mind in inches. "Clean," she whispered. "Just clean." She moved to the desk first. She picked up the shards of a shattered vase. The porcelain was blue and white, delicate. Now, it was just sharp edges. As she gathered the pieces, her hand brushed against something hidden under a pile of torn papers. A sketchbook. June hesitated. She shouldn't look. Nulls weren't supposed to touch royal property. But curiosity was a dangerous thing. She flipped it open. The pages weren't filled with battle plans. They were filled with charcoal sketches. Birds in flight. The castle gardens. And a portrait of a wolf. A sleeping wolf, looking peaceful. June traced the charcoal line with her thumb. "He draws," she thought, her heart stuttering. "The monster draws birds." "What are you doing?" The voice came from the shadows near the balcony. June gasped, the sketchbook slipping from her fingers. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. She spun around. Xander stood there. He had washed the dungeon grime off. He wore fresh clothes, a loose white shirt and dark trousers, but he looked uncomfortable. Like a tiger squeezed into a house cat's collar. His hair was damp, curling at the ends. I was cleaning, Your Highness," June stammered, dropping into a clumsy curtsy. "I didn't know you were here." He didn't yell. He didn't roar. Instead, he walked over, his bare feet silent on the carpet. He bent down, folding his massive frame with surprising grace, and picked up the book. He dusted off the cover with a tenderness that made June's throat tight. "It's ugly," he muttered, not looking at her. "The drawing. It's clumsy." "No," June said. The word was out before she could stop it. "It's beautiful." Xander looked up. His golden eyes locked onto hers. The air in the room shifted. It grew heavy. Charged. "You lie," he said softly. But there was no heat in it. "I don't," June whispered. She took a risk. A massive, stupid risk. She took a step closer. "You drew the wolf sleeping. Because you miss it. You miss the peace." Xander went still. In a heartbeat, his expression crumbled. The arrogant prince vanished, leaving a boy who was just tired of hurting. "I don't remember what peace feels like," he admitted, his voice rough. "Until you."
The smell of her was everywhere. It was maddening. It was intoxicating. Xander stood by the window, watching June dust the mantel. Every time she moved, the scent of vanilla and rainwater drifted toward him, cutting through the psychic noise of the castle like a scalpel. Since she had entered his chambers, the red haze had retreated. It was still there, a low growl in the back of his mind, but it was manageable. For the first time in 6 months, he didn't feel like tearing his own skin off. But then, a new torture began. He wanted to touch her. It wasn't just lust, though his wolf certainly wanted that. It was a need for grounding. He needed to verify her solidity. Feed her, his wolf nudged. Protect her. Xander looked at the silver tray on the table. Dinner had been brought up an hour ago. Roasted pheasant, grapes, soft bread. June hadn't touched a bite. She was too busy working, too busy trying to be invisible. He grabbed a cluster of grapes. "Eat," he said. It came out wrong. It came out like a command. A bark. June jumped, nearly knocking over a candlestick. She turned, eyes wide. "Sir?" Xander winced internally. "Gentle. Be gentle, you idiot. You haven't eaten," he tried again, softening his tone. He walked toward her, holding out the fruit. "You need strength." She looked at the grapes like they were poisoned. I can't eat royal food, Your Highness." I'll eat in the kitchen later. No. The word rumbled in his chest. You stay here. With me. He saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. She thought he was trapping her. And maybe he was. The thought of her leaving the room, walking out into the hallway where other wolves could see her, smell her, touch her, it made his jaw ache with tension. Please, he added. The word felt foreign on his tongue. June hesitated. Then, slowly, she reached out. Her fingers brushed his as she took the grapes. Zap. The contact was electric. A spark of pure, quiet energy shot up his arm. Xander let out a shuddering breath. His eyes rolled back for a second. The psychic noise, the gardener's worry, the guard's boredom, silenced completely. Do that again, he whispered. June froze, her hand halfway to her mouth. What? Touch me, Xander demanded. He stepped closer, crowding her space. He was an addict, and she was the fix. Your hand. Give me your hand. She placed her small, rough hand in his massive palm. The relief was instant. It was like stepping out of a furnace into a cool river. Xander slumped, his forehead resting against hers before he could stop himself. You silenced them, he murmured against her skin. All the voices. They just stop. I'm just a null, June whispered, her breath hitching. No, Xander pulled back just enough to look into her brown eyes. You are the anchor. The moment hung in the air, trembling. But then, a knock hammered at the door. Bang. 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 Your Highness. Beta Silas's voice oozed through the wood. The council is gathering. We need to discuss your condition. Xander's face hardened. The peace broke. The wolf snarled. But he didn't let go of June's hand.
The garden was supposed to be a reprieve. Xander had insisted. Take her for air, he had growled at the guards. If she looks pale, I will have your heads. So, here she was. Walking the perimeter of the royal gardens with 2 armed guards trailing 6 feet behind her. They muttered to each other, their voices low and cruel. Can't believe we're guarding a null. Prince has gone mad. Keeps a pet instead of a mate. June stared straight ahead. She blocked them out. She was good at that. Instead, she focused on the plants. She had grown up in the kitchens, helping the herbalist. She knew the earth. Something was wrong here. The royal gardens were lush, fed by the purest spring water from the mountains. The roses were blooming, deep velvety red. The ivy was thick. Yet, near the stone fountain, the main source that fed the castle's pipes, the flowers were dying. Specifically, the blue monkshood. June stopped. She knelt down. The soil here smelled wrong. It didn't smell like earth. It smelled metallic. Chemical. She reached out to touch a withered petal. Don't touch the royal flowers, rat. A boot slammed down next to her hand. June jerked back, falling onto her rear. One of the guards, a burly man with a scar across his nose, loomed over her. He was sneering. Get up, he spat. You pollute the ground just by walking on it. The flowers, June said, pointing. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. They're dead. Only the monkshood. That's not natural. Who cares? The guard kicked dirt at her. Get moving. Before I decide to tell the prince you tried to run. I wasn't running. June scrambled up. I'm telling you, something is wrong with the water. Shut your mouth. The guard stepped in close, grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise. You think because you warmed the prince's bed, you have a voice? You're nothing. You're a genetic dead end. He squeezed. June cried out. Let go. Without warning, a roar tore through the air from above. It was a sound of raw, acoustic violence. June looked up. On the balcony, 3 stories up, Xander was gripping the stone railing. His knuckles were white. His eyes were glowing so bright they looked like twin suns. "Take your hand off her," Xander bellowed. His voice shook the glass in the windows. "Or lose it." The guard dropped her arm instantly, stumbling back as if burned. As the silence stretched, June rubbed her arm. She looked up at the prince. He wasn't looking at the guard. He was looking at her. And the look on his face wasn't madness. It was terrifyingly possessive. He saw, she thought. He saw me. But as she looked back down at the dead flowers, the pieces clicked together. Monkshood. Also known as wolfsbane. The flowers were dying because the water was saturated with it. It wasn't a curse making the prince crazy. He was being poisoned.
The doors to the council chamber slammed shut. Boom. The sound trapped him inside with the noise. Without June beside him, the silence shattered. The sensory assault returned instantly, a tsunami of whispers, heartbeats, and grinding teeth. Thump-thump. Thump-thump. The pulse of every elder at the long table hammered in his ears. He could smell their sweat. It reeked of ambition and old lies. "Your Highness," Beta Silas sat at the head of the table, steepling his fingers. "We are concerned." Xander gripped the edge of the mahogany table. His claws threatened to puncture the wood. He focused on the pain in his knuckles to stay present. "Concerned?" Xander grit out. His voice was a low growl, vibrating the water in the glasses. "About what, Silas?" "Your stability." Silas smiled, but his eyes remained flat. "There are rumors. You shout from balconies. You keep a null pet in your chambers. You neglect your duties." "Kill him," the wolf roared. "Rip his throat out." The red haze clawed at the edges of Xander's vision. The room tilted. The scratching of a quill on parchment sounded like a screeching knife. "I am unwell," Xander forced the words out. "But I am still the Alpha. For now." Silas leaned forward. "But a sick wolf cannot lead. If you cannot control the beast, the council must intervene. For the safety of the pack." Xander's vision blurred. He saw the red targeting reticle over Silas's throat. It would be so easy. One lunge. But that's what they wanted. If he killed a council member, he would be executed. June, he thought. He grasped for the memory of her scent. Vanilla. Rain. Silence. He closed his eyes, forcing the image of her face to the front of his mind. The way she looked at him. Not with fear, but with that stubborn, quiet defiance. "I am in control," Xander lied. He opened his eyes. They burned gold, but he held his ground. "And I will prove it." Silas raised an eyebrow. He looked disappointed. "Very well. But know this, my prince. The pack grows restless. They need a strong leader. Not a broken one." Meeting adjourned, Xander snarled. He turned and walked out. He didn't run, but it was close. He needed air. He needed the silence. He needed her.
The crystal carafe sat on the bedside table, glistening in the afternoon light. June stared at it. Her heart kicked against her ribs. Thump. 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 If she was wrong, she was just a paranoid servant girl. If she was right, well, that was terrifying in a whole different way. Do it, she told herself. She reached into her apron pocket. Her fingers brushed the cold metal of the silver spoon she had swiped from the dinner tray. It was an old wives' tale. Her grandmother used to whisper it while stirring soup. "Silver knows, child. Silver hates the poison of the wolfsbane. It turns its face away in black shame." June took a deep breath. Her hand trembled as she uncorked the water jug. The smell wafted up. To anyone else, it was odorless. But to June, with her useless human nose that wasn't overwhelmed by instinct, it smelled faintly metallic. Like a copper coin left in the rain. She dipped the spoon into the water. 1 second. 2 seconds. She held her breath. She pulled the spoon out. The spoon wasn't silver anymore. The bowl was jet black. Tarnished instantly, as if it had been sitting in fire for 100 years. June gasped, the spoon clattering to the floor. "Oh God," she whispered, backing away until she hit the bedpost. It wasn't madness. It wasn't a curse from the gods. It wasn't bad genes. They were poisoning him. Every sip he took pushed him closer to the edge. Every glass of water was designed to turn him into a monster so they could justify putting him down. Anger flared in her chest. It was hot and sudden. They had tortured him. They had locked him in the dark and made him think he was broken. "They're killing him," she hissed to the empty room. And suddenly, June wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't just a null. She was the only person in the entire kingdom who knew the truth. The door handle turned. June spun around, kicking the blackened spoon under the bed just as Xander crashed into the room.
He slammed the door and locked it. Xander leaned his forehead against the wood, gasping for air. The noise cut off instantly. The silence of the room washed over him like cool water. He turned, his eyes wild, searching for her. June stood by the bed. She looked pale. Her eyes were wide, dark circles of worry. "Xander," she whispered. He didn't correct her for using his name. He needed it. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. He didn't ask. He just pulled her into his arms. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. Silence. "They want me dead," he mumbled into her skin. His body shook with the aftershocks of the meeting. "Silas, he's pushing me. He wants me to snap." June didn't pull away. Her arms came up, wrapping around his broad shoulders. She was so small, but she felt solid. Unshakable. "You're not going to snap," she said firmly. "I am." Xander pulled back to look at her. He felt the despair clawing at his throat. "I can feel it, June. The poison in my mind, it's getting stronger. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am a monster." "No." June grabbed his face. Her hands were cool. "You are not a monster," she said, her voice fierce. "And you are not sick." Xander blinked, confused by the intensity in her eyes. "What?" "It's the water," she blurted out. She pulled away from him and dropped to her knees, reaching under the bed. She pulled out a spoon. It was black as pitch. "Look," she held it up. "I tested your water. It's wolfsbane. Aconite. They've been dosing you. Probably for months." The room went still. Xander stared at the spoon. Then he looked at the water carafe. Wolfsbane. The one thing that could drive a shifter mad without killing them immediately. It heightened the senses to the point of torture. It stripped away control. It wasn't him. He wasn't broken. A different kind of rage filled him then. It wasn't the hot, chaotic feral madness. This was cold. Ice cold. It was the calculated fury of a king who had been betrayed. "Silas," he breathed the name like a curse. "He's poisoning the water source," June said, standing up. "I saw the dead flowers in the garden. It's coming from the main supply." Xander looked at her. Really looked at her. She had no claws. She had no fangs. She had no wolf. Yet, she had figured out what an entire council of alphas had missed. She had saved his life. "You." Xander reached out, his hand trembling, and cupped her cheek. "You found it." "I see things," she whispered. "Because I have to look out for myself." "You don't have to look out for yourself anymore," Xander growled. The promise vibrated in the air between them. "We fix this. We kill him." "We can't just kill him," June argued, placing her hand over his. "He controls the council. If you attack him now, you prove his point. You prove you're crazy." She was right. God, she was brilliant. Then what? Xander asked. I can't drink the water. The madness will fade, but Silas will know. We have to play his game. June's eyes narrowed. She looked dangerous. We pretend you're still sick. Until we can prove it to the pack. Just then, a heavy envelope slid under the door. Xander walked over and picked it up. He tore it open. What is it? June asked. Xander read the card. His lip curled in a snarl. It's an invitation, he said, crushing the paper in his fist. Silas is holding a full moon banquet tomorrow night. He wants me to attend. He looked at June. They both knew what that meant. It's a trap, June said. Yes, Xander nodded, his golden eyes burning with a new, terrifying clarity. He expects a monster to show up. He walked back to her, pulling her close until her chest bumped against his. Let's show him exactly what a monster can do.
Music drifted through the heavy oak doors, loud and jarring against the quiet terror in June's chest. It was the night of the full moon banquet. The entire castle smelled of roasted boar, heavy red wine, and the underlying, metallic scent of nervous wolves. June adjusted her collar. She wasn't wearing the silk dress Xander had offered. She was back in her gray servant's tunic. Scratchy. Ill-fitting. Invisible. To save the king, she had to become a ghost again. She slipped through the servant's entrance, carrying a pitcher of water. This was from the rain barrels on the west tower, the only water she knew wasn't plumbed into the poisoned main line. Don't look at them, she told herself. Look at the floor. The great hall was a sea of velvet and furs. The pack elders sat at long tables, their laughter too loud, eyes darting toward the empty throne at the high table. They were waiting for the show. They were waiting for the prince to snap. Beta Silas stood by the high table. He hovered over the prince's golden chalice like a vulture. June watched from the shadows of a pillar. With a quick, practiced flick of his wrist, Silas tipped a single clear drop from a vial into the golden cup. June went rigid. He wasn't relying on the plumbing tonight. He was doubling the dose. He wanted Xander to go mad in front of everyone. She had to move. She waited until a serving girl dropped a tray of silverware. Crash. The noise drew every eye in the room, including Silas's. June surged forward. She moved fast, weaving through the waiters. She didn't have a wolf's speed, but she had desperate agility. She reached the high table just as Silas turned his back to scold the clumsy girl. Her hand shook as she reached for the golden chalice. Swap it. Just swap it. She poured the poisoned wine into a potted plant behind the throne and filled the cup from her pitcher. It took 3 seconds. It felt like an hour. You there? A guard's voice boomed. June froze. She set the pitcher down, keeping her head lowered. Refilling the water, sir, she whispered, making her voice small. The guard scoffed. Get out of the way, rat. The prince is coming. June backed away, stepping into the dark just as the double doors blew open.
The silence in the room was a physical weight. Xander stood in the doorway. He wore his ceremonial armor, the black leather creaking softly. He didn't look at the crowd. He kept his eyes locked on the high table. On Silas. Inside, the wolf was pacing. The noise of the room, hundreds of heartbeats, whispers, the smell of fear, hit him hard. It was painful, yes. But he had an anchor now. He pictured June's face. He remembered the cool touch of her hand. Focus. He walked to the throne. Every step was measured. He let his golden eyes flare, just enough to remind them of what he was, but kept his face impassive. My prince, Silas bowed low, a smirk hiding in the corner of his mouth. We are honored you felt well enough to join us. I am always well enough to lead my pack, Xander said. His voice was steady. Silas blinked. He hadn't expected clarity. He expected a growl. Of course, Silas gestured to the golden chalice. A toast then. To the health of the Alpha. The trap was set. Xander looked at the cup. He could smell the wine. He knew that if June hadn't made it in time, drinking this would strip his mind away within seconds. He would tear this hall apart. He looked into the shadows near the kitchen. Two brown eyes watched him. June gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Trust. It was a terrifying thing. Xander picked up the chalice. He held Silas's gaze. To the pack, Xander said. He lifted the cup and drained it. The room went still. Silas watched him with hungry eyes, waiting for the pupil dilation, the sweat, the roar. A beat later, Xander set the cup down hard. Nothing happened. The water was cool and clean. It tasted like nothing. It tasted like sanity. Xander smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous expression. Is something wrong, Beta? Xander asked softly. You look disappointed. Silas paled. His eyes darted to the cup, then back to Xander. The smell of his panic spiked, sour and acrid. He realized his poison had failed. I know, my lord, Silas stammered. I am overjoyed. Good, Xander stepped closer, dropping his voice so only Silas could hear. Because after dinner, we are going to have a very long talk about the flowers in the garden. Silas's eyes went wide. He knew. The dynamic snapped. Silas looked toward the balcony, signaling someone with a frantic hand motion. Xander's senses flared. Trap.
She saw the signal. From her spot in the shadows, June saw Silas wave his hand. It wasn't a nervous tick. It was a command. Up on the mezzanine, behind the heavy velvet curtains, something glinted. Metal. A crossbow. Fear kicked June into motion. They weren't just trying to frame him anymore. Plan A had failed. This was an assassination. Xander! June screamed. Her voice tore through the murmuring hall. It wasn't a servant's whisper. It was a desperate cry. She ran. She threw herself out of the shadows, sprinting toward the high table. Xander turned at the sound of her voice. His eyes found her instantly. But because he turned, he didn't see the bolt flying toward his heart. Down! June shrieked. Xander didn't duck. He saw the bolt, and he saw June running toward him. He realized that if the bolt missed him, it might hit her. So he moved into the path. Thwack! The bolt hit his shoulder. It didn't pierce the armor fully, but the impact staggered him. Assassin, someone screamed. The hall dissolved into violence. Wolves began to shift, clothes tearing, fur sprouting. It was a riot of claws and teeth. Xander roared. This time, it wasn't acting. Pain and rage flooded his system. He ripped the bolt from his shoulder and snapped it in half. Get behind me, he bellowed, grabbing June and shoving her behind the throne. Silas was shouting, pointing at Xander. He's lost it. He's attacking the guests. Kill the beast. It was a lie, but in the chaos, it looked like truth. Xander was bleeding, roaring, his eyes glowing with feral intensity as he flipped the heavy oak table to create a barricade. They won't listen. June cried, grabbing his arm. Silas has turned them. We have to go. Xander looked at the mob of guards rushing the dais. He looked at June. He couldn't fight them all. Not without killing his own people. And if he killed them, he could never be king. Run, Xander growled. He scooped her up in his arms. She weighed nothing to him. With a powerful surge of his legs, he didn't run for the door. He ran for the stained glass window behind the throne. Hold on. Crash. Glass shattered, showering them in colored shards. The night air rushed in, cold and biting. They plummeted from the second story, falling into the dark garden below. The fall should have broken them. But Xander twisted in the air, landing on his feet with a heavy thud, absorbing the impact for both of them. He didn't stop. He sprinted toward the tree-line, carrying June into the black forest. Behind them, the castle alarms began to wail. The king was running. And the girl born without a wolf was the only thing keeping him from the dark.
The forest was a blur of shadows and pain. Every breath Xander took scraped his throat raw. The crossbow bolt had grazed him, yes, but the tip had been coated. He could feel it now, liquid agony spreading through his veins, turning his blood into sludge. Wolfsbane. Xander. June's voice was breathless, terrified. She stumbled, her fingers digging into his bicep hard enough to bruise. You're slowing down. We have to keep moving. I can't, Xander rasped. He leaned against an ancient oak, legs trembling. The Alpha Prime, undone by chemistry and betrayal. What's worse, the forest wasn't silent. Snap. Crunch. Twigs breaking. Heavy boots on dry leaves. They were close. Leave me, Xander growled. He pushed June away, though it felt like severing a limb. Hide. They want me. Not you. No. June grabbed his face. Her eyes were fierce in the moonlight. I am not leaving you. You are my. Thwip. Hiss. Before the words left her lips, a metal canister landed in the leaves between them. It spun, hissing like a viper, spewing thick, purple smoke. Hold your breath. Xander roared. He lunged for her, trying to cover her face with his cloak, but the gas was everywhere. It smelled sickly sweet. Like rotting gardenias. Xander's knees hit the dirt. The world tilted sideways. The paralysis hit him instantly, locking his muscles. He tried to shift, tried to call the wolf, but the connection was dead static. Well. Silas emerged from the smoke, wearing a gas mask that made him look like a giant insect. 10 guards surrounded him, weapons drawn. Look at the mighty beast, Silas sneered, his voice muffled. Brought low by a little chemistry. Don't. Xander choked out. He reached for June. She was on the ground, coughing, her eyes rolling back. Grab the girl, Silas ordered. And chain the monster. It's time for the finale. 2 guards grabbed June by her hair. No. Xander screamed, but it came out as a pathetic wheeze. They dragged her away into the shadows. Her hand reached out for him, fingers grasping at the dirt, leaving desperate trails in the earth. Xander. She whispered, her voice fading. Then, the ground rushed up to meet him, and everything went black.
Cold. Damp. Stagnant. June woke up to the smell of rust. She didn't need to open her eyes to know where she was. The air felt heavy, pressing against her skin like deep water. She was back. Back in the dungeon. Back in the cell where she had first met him. She sat up, head spinning. The heavy iron door was shut. There was no bucket this time. No mop. Just her, and the crushing isolation. Hello, she croaked. The echo was her only answer, hollow and mocking off the stone walls. She scrambled to her feet and ran to the door. She pounded on the iron with her fists until her skin split. Let me out. Silas is a traitor. He's poisoning the prince. Silence. She sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. Frustration stung her eyes. She was back to being a ghost. A null. A nobody. He's going to kill him, she thought, panic tightening her throat. Silas is going to finish what he started, and I'm locked in a box. Maybe it was fate. Maybe she was destined to be invisible. But then, she looked at her hands. They were dirty, scratched, and trembling. But they were the hands that had held the Alpha. They were the hands that had felt his heartbeat. I am not nothing, she realized. I am the anchor. She wasn't valuable because of magic or claws. She was valuable because she saw the truth when everyone else was blind. In the quiet that followed, a sound vibrated through the stone floor. It started low, a deep, resonant thrum that shook the dust from the ceiling. Then, it grew. It wasn't a scream. It was a roar. But not like before. This wasn't the roar of a man fighting a beast. This was the roar of a beast that had won. June pressed her ear to the door. Her breath hitched. "Xander," she whispered.
There was no Xander. There was only pain. And the wolf. He was chained in the center of the courtyard. Great iron links bound his wrists and ankles to 4 heavy posts. The moon was high now, full and blindingly white. Silas stood before him, safe outside the reach of the chains. He held a long syringe filled with black liquid. "The pack is watching, Highness," Silas shouted to the crowd gathered on the balconies. "Witness the corruption. Witness the madness." He stepped forward and jabbed the needle into Xander's neck. Fire. Liquid fire pumped straight into his jugular. Pure, concentrated wolfsbane. The man, the prince who loved poetry and drew birds, shattered. The red haze didn't just creep in this time. It flooded him. It washed away the logic, the restraint, the humanity. "Where's the silence?" The wolf screamed inside his head. "Gone," the darkness answered. "She is gone." Without the anchor, the psychic pressure of the crowd hit him all at once. Fear. Disgust. Betrayal. It was 1,000 needles stabbing into his brain. "Roar for US." Silas laughed. And he did. Xander threw his head back. His bones cracked and shifted. Fur burst through his skin, black as pitch. His jaw elongated, teeth sharpening into serrated daggers. He didn't just shift. He exploded into the form of the alpha beast, a creature twice the size of a normal wolf, a monster from the old stories. Snap. The iron chain on his right arm sheared like wet twine. The crowd screamed. Silas stopped laughing. Snap. The left chain gave way. The wolf shook its massive head, shaking off the last remnants of the prince. Golden eyes burned with zero recognition. It turned its gaze on Silas. There was no thought of justice. No thought of the throne. There was only the need to silence the noise. And the only way to silence the noise was to kill everything that made a sound.
The ceiling shook, raining ancient dust into her hair. Boom. It sounded like the castle's spine was snapping. Above her, the structure was failing. Xander was up there, alone, suffocating in the madness, and she was sitting in the dark feeling sorry for herself. She wiped her eyes with the back of her dirty hand. No more, she thought. No more waiting. She crawled to the door. The lock was heavy iron, old and rusted. Most people would have tried to break it, but June knew better. She had spent 5 years scrubbing these locks, learning their secrets. She reached into the hem of her bodice. Her fingers found the stiff metal wire of her corset stay. She ripped it free. Thin. Sharp. Strong. She slid the wire into the keyhole. "Come on," she whispered, hands trembling. "Please." She twisted the wire, feeling for the tumblers. She closed her eyes, blocking out the terror, focusing entirely on the tactile sensation of metal against metal. She had to be precise. One wrong move would snap the wire. Click. The sound was small, but in the silence, it was significant. The heavy tumblers shifted. June didn't hesitate. She shoved the lever down. The door groaned open, just a crack. She slipped through the gap. The corridor was empty. The guards had abandoned their posts, drawn upstairs by the screaming. June ran. She ran barefoot, soles slapping against the cold stone. Her breath jagged in her throat. Her legs ached. Yet, she pushed harder. She pushed harder because she could hear him now. Not a man. A beast. The roar that echoed down the stairwell was a sound of absolute ruin. It vibrated in her teeth. It was the sound of a creature that had forgotten its own name. "I'm coming," she screamed internally. Don't let go, Xander. She reached the bottom of the spiral staircase leading to the courtyard. The air here was thick with smoke and a metallic tang of blood. She didn't know what scared her more, the monster waiting above, or the possibility that she was already too late. But then, she remembered his eyes. She remembered the way he looked at her when the noise stopped. So, she took the stairs 2 at a time.
The world was crimson. There was no Xander. There was no prince. There was only the hunger and the noise that needed to be severed. Make it stop, the instinct screamed. The thing in the black coat, the one that smelled like sour milk and poison, was backing away. The thing was making noises. Sharp, high-pitched noises. Fear. The beast lunged. The ground shook beneath its paws. Stone tiles shattered into dust. The beast moved as a blur of shadow and rage. Soldiers stood in the way. They held sharp sticks. They shouted. Annoying. With a single swipe of a claw the size of a butcher's knife, the beast cleared the path. Armor buckled. Men were scattered like chaff. They weren't enemies, they were debris. The beast didn't want to kill them. It just wanted to get to the source. The source of the pain. The source of the poison. The thing in the black coat fell over. It scrambled backward on hands and feet, crab-walking across the stones. Shoot it! The thing shrieked. Kill it now! The beast snarled. The sound ripped from its throat, a vibration that cracked the glass in the windows of the great hall. It loomed over the thing. Saliva dripped from its jaws, sizzling on the pavement. Silence you, the beast thought. Crush you. Then the noise will stop. It raised a massive paw. The claws gleamed in the moonlight, ready to descend. But then, a new scent hit the air. It sliced through the copper smell of blood. It pierced the acrid smoke. Vanilla. Rain. Quiet. The beast froze. The paw hovered in the air. The crimson vision flickered. For a heartbeat, the beast was confused. It turned its massive head. Through the smoke, something small was running. Something that didn't smell like fear. Something that didn't scream. The beast blinked. The connection was faint, a single thread in a hurricane, but it was there. Anchor? But before the thought could form, a sharp pain exploded in its shoulder. Thwack. Another bolt. The pain brought the rage back instantly. The crimson vision returned, darker and bloodier than before. The beast roared, turning away from the scent, turning back to the violence. Because of that pain, the mercy died.
The courtyard was a ruin. June skidded to a halt at the top of the stairs, chest heaving. The scene before her froze her blood. Xander was gone. In his place stood a nightmare. A wolf the size of a warhorse, with fur that seemed to absorb the light and eyes that burned like molten gold. He stood over Silas, claws raised for the killing blow. Xander, she screamed. Her voice was lost in the chaos. Soldiers were everywhere, scrambling to reload heavy ballistas mounted on the castle walls. Giant spears, tipped with silver, were aimed directly at the beast's heart. Fire, a captain shouted. Take him down. The beast didn't see the weapons. He was too lost in the fury. He didn't know he was about to die. June moved. Her body reacted on instinct. She didn't think about the danger. She didn't think about the fact that she was a 90-pound human running toward a titan of destruction. She just ran. She sprinted across the cobblestones, bare feet bleeding on the sharp debris. Don't shoot, she shrieked, waving her arms. Stop. But the soldiers couldn't hear her, or they didn't care. The gears of the ballistas clicked into place. Twang. The first spear flew. It missed the beast by inches, shattering the stone beside his paw. The beast roared, whirling around to face the attackers. He crouched, ready to launch himself at the wall. If he jumped, they would riddle him with silver. He would be dead before he hit the ground. No. June threw herself forward. She didn't run away from the monster. She ran between the monster and the arrows. She skid to a stop right in front of the beast. She stood there, arms spread wide. The beast froze. He loomed over her, a mountain of fur and muscle. Hot breath, smelling of iron and rage, blasted her face. His teeth were bared, inches from her skull. The soldiers on the wall hesitated. They couldn't shoot. Not without hitting the girl. As the silence stretched, June looked up. She looked straight into the burning, feral eyes of the creature. She didn't flinch. She didn't tremble. "I see you," she whispered, her voice cutting through the night. "Xander. I see you." The beast growled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through her soles. But he didn't strike. He was listening.
The roar built in his chest, a seismic pressure seeking release. The beast didn't understand words. It didn't understand stop. It only understood dominance. The soldiers on the wall were threats. The man on the ground was a threat. But the girl? She was static. She stood there, arms wide, blocking his path to the enemy. She was small. Fragile. One swipe would unmake her. Yet, she didn't smell like prey. She smelled like the only quiet thing in a screaming world. "Move," the beast commanded. He didn't speak it. He projected it. The alpha pressure exploded outward. It wasn't just a wave, it was a gravity well. The feral command that no wolf could withstand. The air shimmered. Tomb. The impact was physical. On the walls, the soldiers collapsed. They dropped their weapons, clutching their heads as the sheer weight of the alpha's presence crushed their wills. Even Silas, crawling on the stones, was flattened. He smashed face first into the cobblestones, pinned by the invisible force. The courtyard collapsed into submission. Except for one. The girl didn't move. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. The beast recoiled. He stepped back, confused. The command crushed spirits. It broke minds. Why was she still standing? "Xander," she said. Her voice sliced through the noise. It wasn't loud, but it was absolute. She took a step toward him. The beast snarled, baring teeth capable of shearing steel. Warning. But she didn't stop. She walked right up to his muzzle. She reached out a hand, a tiny, shaking hand, and placed it right on the center of his chest. The rage didn't just fade, it evaporated. Zap. The connection was instant. The red bled out of his vision, replaced by clarity. The noise, the screaming, the heartbeats, the bloodlust, silenced. It was like a heavy door slamming shut against a storm. The fur began to recede. The bones shifted, cracking and snapping back into place. The pain was blinding, but the relief was absolute. The beast retreated. The man returned.
The transformation was visceral. 1 second, a giant black wolf loomed over her. The next, the wet sound of shifting bone filled the air. The massive creature shrank, fur dissolving into skin, claws retracting into fingers. Xander collapsed forward. June caught him. He was heavy, unresisting weight, and naked, covered in sweat and dust. They fell to their knees together on the hard stone. June wrapped her arms around his shoulders, holding him upright. "I've got you," she whispered, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. "I've got you." The courtyard was silent. The soldiers were slowly getting up, looking dazed, rubbing their heads. They stared at the prince. They didn't see a monster. They saw a man who had conquered himself. "You." Xander rasped. His head rested on her shoulder. "You stopped it." "We stopped it," June said. But the night wasn't over. A shadow moved in the periphery. Silas. He had dragged himself up. He held a silver dagger in his hand. His face was twisted, contorted by pure, distilled hate. "Die." Silas shrieked. "Die, you abomination." He lunged. June screamed, trying to shield Xander with her body. No. But she didn't need to. In the span of a heartbeat, Xander moved. He didn't need to shift. He didn't need claws. He was the Alpha Prime. He caught Silas's wrist in midair. Crack. The sound of the bone breaking was crisp. Silas screamed, dropping the knife. Xander stood up, hauling Silas up with him by the broken wrist. Xander was naked, bleeding, and exhausted, but he looked like judgment personified. "You poisoned my pack," Xander said. His voice was low. "Final. You tried to kill my mate. She's a null." Silas spat, though his eyes widened in terror. "She's nothing. She is the anchor," Xander growled. He didn't hesitate. He didn't offer a trial. With a single, brutal motion, Xander threw Silas. He tossed him like a sack of grain across the courtyard. Silas hit the stone wall with a wet impact and didn't move again. It was over. The soldiers on the wall lowered their weapons. One by one, they dropped to one knee. "Long live the Alpha," a captain whispered. "Long live the Alpha," the chant began, growing louder. Xander didn't look at them. He turned back to June. He knelt down in the dirt, ignoring the crowd, ignoring the blood. He took her face in his hands. "June," he breathed. And then he kissed her. It tasted of iron and smoke and rain. It was the kiss of a man who had finally found the shore. 2 weeks later. The air on the balcony was crisp. It smelled of wood smoke and turning leaves. June leaned against the stone railing, looking out over the kingdom. Scaffolding surrounded the main aqueduct. Workers were clearing out the poisoned pipes, replacing them with fresh clay. The garden below was already healing. The monks had been dug up and burned. The roses were drinking deep. "You're thinking too loud." Warm arms wrapped around her waist from behind. "Xander." June smiled, leaning back into his chest. He was solid. "Real." "I'm just looking," she said. "It's going to be a good harvest," Xander murmured, resting his chin on the top of her head. He wasn't cured. Not fully. The red haze still scratched at the back of his mind sometimes, especially when the castle got too loud. But it didn't matter. She was always there. "How is the council?" June asked, turning in his arms. Xander smirked. "Terrified of you." June laughed. "Me? I'm just a null." "You're the woman who walked through an Alpha command," Xander kissed her forehead. "They think you're a witch. Or a goddess." "And what do you think?" she asked softly. Xander's expression turned serious. His golden eyes searched hers, filled with an intensity that grounded her to the spot. "I think you are my silence," he whispered. "I think you brought me back." He took her hand, the small, rough hand of a servant, and pressed it to his heart. Thump thump. Thump thump. Steady. Strong. "I love you, June Barros," he said. "I love you, Xander Thorne," she replied. As the sun set, casting long purple shadows across the stone, the Alpha King and the Null Girl stood together. They didn't need words. They had something better. They had peace.